WV Uncommonplace. This podcast is a variety podcast that houses numerous series to cover mental health, empowerment, podcast framework, and various intimate theories to get to know the hosts, along with occasional movies reviews and dives in pop culture with our event podcast episodes. The Uncommonplace digs into bringing guests on that stories don't fit the mold and are very different. WV stands for the great state of West Virginia, and every quarter we cover something in West Virginia. Stacy and myself, JR, are your hosts, so please come along for this venture to Uncommonplace.
Howdy, everybody. I'm still getting used to running my soundboard and playing the audio like that. I have a guest with me today. Her name is Autumn Karen. And please, everybody, that's her real name. Don't go any further with it. I know people want to slice that up, and it's a shame it's not autumn. It's winter and it's cold everywhere around us. So the nostalgic question that we ask on WV interviews and sessions is this: who is Autumn Karen? So Autumn Karen, thank you for coming on the show. Please tell us who you are.
Thank you so much, JR. So I'm Autumn Karen. I'm a professional ghostwriter, filmmaker, and educator. I mostly write other people's books for a living. That's what I do. And then I also teach students at Appalachia University. I'm English faculty there and teach all kinds of like writing for the medical humanities and ghostwriting. And I teach freshman writing and walk students through writing novellas and all kinds of stuff. And then I also have a production company, a distribution and development company called Medusa's Gaze. We focus on women and gender diverse voices behind the camera. And I also have a publishing company called Woven Lines. And so I do all the things, man.
Whoa, you've got many hats. Now let's start off here. You spent your career amplifying traditionally unheard voices, like you just said. What drives your passion for bringing these stories to light?
I think my passion comes from, well, if I'm honest, my passion comes from hearing my mom and my grandma talk about stories and talk about people's stories who weren't usually heard. And we grew up sitting around the table, like having them talk to people. My mom talked to people everywhere we went. And so we would be at yard sales or at the grocery store, and mama would be talking to folks everywhere we went. And was always the little kid like pulling on her, like, Mom, come on, let's go. I don't want to stand here while you hear this person's story forever. And she was always talking to people who weren't usually heard, right? The folks of the lower class, especially, whose stories are not told. And that's really where it comes from for me as my mama. I mean, I know that's colloquial, but there we go.
But we can roll with that. Now, as a journalist and a ghostwriter, how do you approach storytelling about systematic oppression and issues in society's challenges? How do you approach that?
The main way that I approach is, again, with listening. So this is not the life that I have lived. As much as I have lived in, I'm a white woman, so I have an immense amount of privilege. But I do come from a background of very little means. And so really my hook is to think about the privilege that I have and then intersect that with trying to help folks who do not have access to that same privilege. So even though I come from, people who were, I don't want to know how else to say, but poor, but really poor folks, who were really struggling and struggling like, we only heated one room in the house, kind of struggling, or, we didn't have enough to eat, kind of struggling. I listen to other people. And so that's really kind of that intersection of listening to other people and then using this access that I have as a woman who can pass for someone who is of like a higher socioeconomic class, who has access to more privilege, then kind of bridging that gap. That's really where I see my role. And that's what I strive to do in my work, is to kind of cross that bridge between people who are outside of the system and then like the mainstream system. So in my work as a college professor, I am very much part of a class system that most people don't really have access to, who are in those other levels. And I really do start out with listening. So as a ghostwriter and even as a filmmaker, I make it a practice to lead with the creativity of the people whose stories I'm telling. So it doesn't matter to me if if you see your story in a different way, then that's what I want to convey. I'm not trying to fit it into the box of traditional academia or traditional publishing. I want to be as authentic as possible to where you're coming from. And so sometimes that means that stories are told in a less traditional way. And I love doing that. And then also leading into the creativity of marginalized folks. And then there's a piece of translating that through kind of modern America. So we want to meet the audience. We want to be able to connect with an audience while maintaining that authenticity. And it's that bridge building that I try to do. That's the goal.
Okay, and I like that because I come from a weird class because I'm like I told you I'm from Lynchburg, Virginia, and I come from a middle class, but the middle class, the lower part of our class, we started in the trailer park, and from the trailer park, if you didn't work the jobs and you didn't, I mean, everyone had the opportunity for education. So like where I'm from, for instance, if you got the education propelled you into different areas, and it moved you. You still were in the middle class, but it moved you up into the middle of the middle class. And that's where I always consider myself still to this day. And being in that middle is one of the hardest places to be because you're not at the top of the class, you're not at the bottom, but you're just above poverty level in certain areas and certain things you wish you were below poverty level and to get certain help and things like that. But your education, and I always try to tell this to the younger people because I'm 39 years old. I tell them that education does make a difference in certain areas. Now, the technical aspect and, people going to vocation schools, no disrespect to them, but everybody has a place in our society. And like you said, telling those stories is very hard, because like I went from being in central Virginia to moving to northwest West Virginia or Parkersburg, West Virginia.
Wow.
So that was moving into West Virginia, going from the south up to the north part, they're the social economic climate is totally different, and even being a transplant, I'll tell you this, and this is wild. Living in West Virginia, that's where I live. I make my money, like I told you, I travel. I make my money outside of West Virginia, and then I break commerce by spending it in West Virginia. So I get exactly what you're saying. Now, can you share a moment with me from your work where storytelling directly impacted a community or individual in a meaningful way to you?
Oh gosh. Okay, so first of all, let me say this. I'm a professional ghostwriter, so the vast majority of my books are I can't tell you like I can't. I've written 28 books, and so I can't tell you. That's a good question. It- it's hard for me not to talk about the story of James Hart Stern. So James Hart Stern was James Hart Stern was a black preacher from LA who ended up in a prison cell with Edgar Ray Killen in Mississippi. And he was an activist and a preacher in Los Angeles, and then ended up in this prison cell, was wrongfully convicted, and ended up with Edgar Ray Killen, who was the man who committed the Mississippi burning murders. And then during his time with Edgar Ray Killen, Killen signed over the KKK to this black preacher. And that was really through sheer force of James's will and community and his faith and really through his ability to see the world in a different way. So he would not, I don't think he would have called himself Killen's friend, but he certainly saw Killen with a sense of mercy, even though this man had done these horrible things, and so built these bridges. And I look at the bridge building that Reverend Stern did, and that definitely touched communities. So James died of bladder cancer in 2019. My name is on his memoir, and so that's why I can talk about it.
Yes.
And I flew out to LA for his funeral, and seeing the communities that he built in his church, that was a direct impact. The way that people came out and talked about him, the way people talk about folks after they die is a whole nother, that's its own thing. But really impacts. And every time somebody encounters the story and reaches out to me, or in whatever capacity his story comes back around, it always touches people. It gives them a different perspective, which was really his talent, and what his book was about was changing the perspective of people. So yeah, definitely Reverend Stern. I'd say that.
Okay, I like that. I like that. Now, let's move over to you as an educator at High Point University and an honors fellow at UNC Greensboro. How do you integrate storytelling into your teaching? I want to know how you do that.
The first place that I integrate storytelling in my teaching is I work with students to understand their own stories, right? You cannot tell someone else's story if you don't understand yours. So all of my courses start with that. So for instance, right now I'm teaching professional writing for the medical humanities, which is really for pre-med, pre-pharmacy, pre-dental students, pre-optometry students, pre-health sciences, and they're learning narrative medicine. And in that, they have to be able to tell their own medical stories first. So, like, how do I make sense of how I experienced the doctor? How do I make sense of how I have experienced whatever encounter I may have had? Because everybody has encounters with the medical system, right? These are 22-year-olds, and so they really haven't necessarily, a lot of them have had significant medical experiences, but all of them have had like their wisdom teeth out, or they've been to the doctor, like you've been to the doctor for something.
Yes.
How do you tell that story to yourself? And then we extrapolate, how do you tell patient stories? So centering story within like the person, that's where it all starts for teaching. And that's also where it starts with coaching. Doesn't matter what somebody's book is about. So I've written books for people for like farm finance and like real estate and like all kinds of things. But even within those, they have to know what their own story is before they can start to tell something else. Even if it's like a trade book, you still have to know what that is for yourself. So there's a lot of that. It's definitely about self-definition for me when I'm like working with clients or working with students, whatever is the case, working in film. It's all about how are you telling your own story.
So true, so true. Now let me ask you this: inside of doing that, you take on a role of a mentor. So you're the mentor, and there's a mentee. How do you embrace the mentorship portion of your job? And then when you're dealing with like the next generation of writers, your legacy, they're coming off of your, as we call it in football, a coaching tree. So they're coming off of your tree. These people they leave you and they go teach somewhere else or go write. They go 6 degrees away from you. And then by the time you're finished, you've got 20 people lined up just from the one student or prospective person that you have helped out. How do you work out that mentorship? Like, how do you align it? And I know you've seen it because people have gone on to write things and they've been inspired by you. So like, how do you handle that? And how do you got a formula for that? Because mentorship is a hard thing to do.
Mentorship is a hard thing to do, but I'll tell you, and I'm also a mom, right? Like I have 3 boys. So, and I'm a single mom, so I'm like the lamp post for them as well. They're all hiding in their rooms right now while I'm doing this. For me, it's really watching and encouraging students, mentees, whatever the case is, to take risks, right? Especially in the age that we live in. Being safe and like doing what everybody else is doing, that's not going to get anybody anywhere. And it's also not fulfilling. So we see this real homogenization of writing, of culture as the internet gets bigger, as AI comes in, and it's just like the lowest common denominator and the most kind of bland version. And my ideas, and this comes directly from my mom and my grandma, is to take big swings and take the risk. So, for instance, right now, and I just had a session with her, a student who's working on a novella. We developed it last semester, and then we're editing and refining it, blowing it out, making it bigger this semester, one-on-one. And this girl came in, and I would have never expected her to write a psycho killer novel. Like she comes in and she wears little bows in her hair, and she is just so like bright and incredibly like adept at writing. But when we sat down and I'm like, well, okay, we're gonna write a novella this semester, last fall. Like, what do you want to do? What are your ideas? And she had several ideas, and then she was like, and then I kind of like horror. I kind of like blood and guts. And I was like, let's go. Like that's the thing that you're quietest about, that you're kind of shy about. So let's dive in. And she has written the most just gory, like disgusting, like poking people's eyes out, kind of very tense thriller that you would not have expected out of her, but really encouraging folks to take the risk. And most of the time, people just need that encouragement. They just need to be told, hey, that weirdness, that freaky thing that you want to do, people are going to dig that. And that's where your talent is actually going to lie. So instead of playing it safe, I am constantly encouraging people to take the risk, do the big swing, do the weird thing, because that's what you actually want to do anyway. You're not going to be happy kneecapping yourself. I'm always telling students, stop kneecapping your sentences. And so like we don't want to kneecap our ideas. And that goes in with filmmaking as well. Like, let's take the big risk. Let's do the weird thing. Infinity Care, which is my current piece that's in production, is a big swing. And I had a mentor who did that with me. And when I was developing the script one-on-one with her, she looked at me and she saw that thing that I hesitated, but she knew that was the idea I wanted to do. And that's become Infinity Care. And so, yeah, there you go.
Okay. Now, you have a talent, ghostwriting. Ghostwriting involves stepping to someone else's perspective. How do you have a delicate balance of authenticity and creativity in co-authoring works? Because I don't have a skill like that. I can't ghostwrite. Like I thought one time I thought I was going to be a rapper, which everybody has a dream of doing something. And I was like, I couldn't write a good thing and then give it to someone else or contribute to something and then something unless I made a lot of money off of it. Obviously, if I write a song for Prince or Michael Jackson or something like that, that's different. I don't care. I made an arrangement, I sent it to them, boom. But just some riffraff from around the road that has a record deal, no, I don't want to do that. I couldn't do that. Like, how do you do that?
All right, so I'm going to be practical here. In money, that's just it. When I became a ghostwriter, I kind of fell into this because I was a sole breadwinner. I had 4 kids that had to be fed, and I started writing online because I was a teacher, and then that turned into blogs and ebooks and books. And I became a ghostwriter because every book I wrote was like food on the table for the kids. It is pragmatic. So how do I get my ego out of it? I don't think about those books anymore because like they paid bills. They just practically fed kids. And even now, I did that for like 10 years without substantive credit on a book. And I just don't, it's not about me. The analogy that I give is it's like a plumber, right? Like nobody's asking you who your plumber was. When they come in and they use your bathroom, they're not like, well, who's the guy? Obviously you didn't do this yourself. Well, of course you didn't do it yourself. Like that's not your skill. That's not your talent. You don't have to install toilets. And it's not that writing is like installing toilets, but it is also kind of like installing toilets, JR. Like
Yeah, I can
it's
roll
a
with that.
skill. It's a trade. We were talking about trade schools earlier. It's a trade. And so I don't have an ego attached to the books that I write. A lot of me prefers to not have my name on them. I mean, it just complicates things. Also, people will occasionally put things in books and I'm like, whoa, that's real sexist. That's real racist. I don't want to have my name on that. Like you added that after I finished. When I talk to my students a lot about the ethics of it. And I've had people add things into books after I was done, because I'm very careful about what I do. Like I consider myself an ethical liar, but they'll add things and I'm just like, that's not okay to put out into the world. But my name is also not on it. So I mean,
Gotcha.
it's
Yeah.
you.
Yeah. So at the end of the day, like it's cool because you can just walk away, kind of like being a bartender at a bar that no one knows your name, and you just go in, work, make your money, get out of there. That's a good analogy for that one. Yeah, I like that. Now you have a book, Mississippi Still Burning. Tell a story about transforming hatred into a message of hope. How did this project shape your views on redemption and change?
Oh gosh, I get chills talking about James. So that's Reverend Stern's
Right.
book. Gosh, it's hard to articulate thinking about somebody who was that meaningful. Reverend Stern was also like there for me in a very difficult time in my life. I finished that book and then he and I continued to stay close. I actually recorded enough for another book before he died. And that man walked me, it was one of those like situations. He walked me through a really difficult transition in my life. And I would call the book transformative because Reverend Stern himself was transformative. And then it is very deeply personal for me. Like my life is better, and my personal life is better because of having known him. So that book definitely transformed my life. That was the first book that ever had my name on it. And still, like, to this day, he took a chance on me. He wanted a white female Southern writer. That's how I ended up hooked up with him. The press that he was working with, the company I'd already been writing for. Um, and so they matched us up because he really wanted somebody to build those bridges. And so a lot of my worldview in writing comes from him, and it's reflected in that book. Yeah, and I hear his voice. Like I will say, that book sounds like it when you read the cadence of the speech. I'm really proud of the way that it captured how he talks and how he talked past tense, which is crazy. He's been gone for 5 years. Not over it.
Understandable.
Yeah, there you go.
When someone's impactful. Now we're going to go all around the globe with this one. Amy, book 1. Redefines empowerment, erotica in a unique cultural setting. What made this project stand out in your career?
So that is a whole nother, right? So we go from taking down the KKK to a feminist erotica novel. And that one was a lot of fun to write. It is inspired by a real woman, and so I did interview her and then fictionalized. It's very deeply fictionalized, like the details you would not know that it was her. But kind of the feeling, which is when I write fiction now or when I coach people through fiction, fiction does come from real life. Like it has to be real experiences. So I was approached to develop that book by Jeremiah James. We're actually reissuing that book. It's going to come out February 14th. Wovenlines.pub is the publishing company, and we're going to re-release that. There's a fantastic audiobook version of it on Audible. But I was approached because of my women's studies background. I have an undergraduate degree in women's health that focused on women's studies and have always had a passion for women's empowerment. And that's why I was approached for that book. And it ended up really being about, I mean, it's really explicit. I mean, like it's an explicit book. If you read it, this is not something that, my students, when I teach, I'll put the cover of the book up there and say, but it's not something that my university folks would be reading. But at the same time, it's really rooted in women's self-image. And so Amy, the protagonist, goes on a journey that is selfish at times. She is a deeply flawed protagonist, like a real person. And she makes some reckless and stupid choices, but she also is grasping for her own autonomy. And that's really what that book is about. It is a planned trilogy. So that is book 1. And then in future books, we see her grapple with some of the decisions. But the first one is really just fluffy. We really just see her being reckless and getting herself into a situation, and she becomes like a secret swinger. Like that's
wow,
what that book is.
Hey, that's a Cinemax movie.
It is very
or
much.
Showtime.
Yeah,
wow.
she becomes behind her husband's back and goes off and has some adventures and yeah, so
that's definitely check out. So audience, check that out. And thank you for doing something on the show that I didn't even have to tell you to do. We do have a thing that's nostalgic about the show. It's called a shameless plug, but I would like you to do this one for me. This shameless plug, I want you to let everyone in the audience know where they can meet and greet you across the internet or however you get greeted, even if it's snail mail. If it's snail mail, we'll just put it in the show notes though.
Look, I appreciate the idea of snail mail. No, so you can find me at autumnkaren.com, Karen, just like that. So I bought that domain name like 6 months before the Karen memes hit the internet, and then I was like, well, I'm just going with that as it is. So autumnkaren.com, and you can find me I'm Autumn at Autumn Carrying, which is like an inside joke from my childhood, but Autumn Carrying on Instagram and TikTok, and you'll find me on YouTube. So I get around, and LinkedIn. I mean, I always like talking to people on LinkedIn. It feels professional.
Yeah, so much. Okay. Now,
so yeah, that's where you'll find me.
Now, one thing that we do on the show is I pay homage to a news magazine that I grew up with on Friday nights. I used to watch TGI Friday. TGI Friday would end up being fairly decent, whatever they had on at the time. Usually it was ended with Boys Meets World, and then it went over to this news magazine. And I'm not a fan of Dan Rather, so I'm not talking about 60 Minutes. I'm talking about 2020. 2020 had John Stossel on there, comic relief. It had Diane Sawyer, Elizabeth Vargas later on in life. They were the ones that were kind of poignant with their interviews, but it had a lady on there, the late great Barbara Walters. And two things could happen with her during an interview. The interview could be flat and the news station cuts her off at 11 o'clock. Or the interview could do something and move the crowd, could be compelling. And it didn't happen 4 Fridays out of the month. 2 Fridays were probably dull. But it will get stretched out to like 11:04, 11:05. So some people's parents, even though on a Friday night they want to watch news, I never understood that. You know, they would get mad, but Barbara Walters would be going in and she would just, the interview would be perfect. And that's what it inspired a lot of people to become journalists because, we all know that some of her stuff was scripted, but just the way that she did that emotion, the camera panning in and out, it worked for you. So, Autumn Karen, you are on the ticker for 2020 questions. Are you ready?
Absolutely. Let's go.
All right, so here's your fun one. This is John's Sasso question. You get up in the morning, right? You don't have to go to work. How does your morning start? What is the first item you have to have in the morning to start your day?
Oh gosh, this is horrible, but I do have my phone. I roll over and I love the TikTok. I hope it doesn't go away. So I roll over and I like to get deep in the morning. My TikTok feed is like people analyzing, the ravages of domesticity on women or gosh, I'm trying to think of a TikTok that I saw recently. So I love to watch intellectuals take deep dives into how pop culture and things intersect. And if I start my day that way, then I kind of feel like I've gotten some intellectual food, like for my brain. So I have to put a time limit on myself. And so I let myself have 15 minutes of TikTok and then I have to get my ass out of bed.
And get going, right?
And get going.
Because normally some people tell me like a cup of coffee, a certain type of breakfast, a glass of milk, some orange juice, but yours is TikTok. My co-host Stacy, she would really, really like that because she's a TikTok person. Even though I do stuff over there, TikTok, I've seen what it does to people. Now let me do something real quick for the audience, and for you on this one. This is funny. You said very intellectual stuff, and I consider myself to be a person of decent intellect. I get on there and watch mindless stuff. I watch some random cat fight people. It fights other cats and it just runs. So that's something that I do there. I don't. His name's Maxwell, so he seems distinguished. So I said, Maxwell, the cat. I'll watch him now. Here goes your first. This is your Elizabeth Vargas. Infinity Care is based on your experience with loss. What inspired you to translate such a deep personal story into a screenplay?
So Infinity Care is the first piece that I ever wrote for myself. It's the first movie script that I ever wrote, and it's based on a recurring dream that I had. So my daughter passed away in 2015 from epilepsy. She was 3.5. Hermione was fantastic, and she was severely challenged. She had something called Emmanuel syndrome. She didn't walk, she didn't talk. And, all those milestones that you anticipate having with a daughter. I have 3 boys besides her. All those milestones, they never came with her, and they would not have ever come. And then when she passed, it's complicated, right? It's complicated because you've already kind of mourned a child. That's the thing with having a child with severe disabilities, is you mourn this future that you expected for them to have. So when I gave birth to a little girl, we didn't know what she was going to be. We didn't learn the sex of our kids. So when she was born, it's like, oh, that immediate flash of, I see like walking her down the aisle. I see getting her ready for prom. And I mean, they're horrible, like patriarchal things. But I was raised by 2 women. And so you kind of imagine yourself raising a daughter. And my sons, our society sets us up to have different connections based on gender, that's bull crap in and of itself. And then when she passed, I mourned her again because I learned to love the person that she became, the person that she was. So when you have a kid, you have this view of who they're going to be, and then there's who the kid actually turns out to be. And they are not the same thing, right? And so even with my sons now, my oldest is about to go out to college. He's not the person who he was when he was a little kid. You have to let go. There's a mourning process. So when she passed, it's complicated because there's freedom to it. And it's hard stuff, but there's freedom to it. She required a lot of care. If Hermione was still alive today, right? She would be 14 years old, and she would undoubtedly still be in diapers. Like it would have been care for a big person, and my life would be completely different. And so it's incredibly complicated when you lose a child like that, uh, that you never wanted, right? Like, it's a freedom I didn't want. I would have changed her diapers until I died. Like, that was never a question. So I had this recurring dream after she passed, and I'm a big sci-fi fan. I love Star Trek, love those kinds of things, super Trekkie. And I had this recurring dream that was kind of like the Twilight Zone, kind of like one of those weird episodes of The Next Generation. And I wrote it down as a short story because I couldn't stop thinking about it. Never anything I was going to share with anybody. And then I went into my master's in fine arts and screenwriting through School of the Arts. And my mentor, Agatha Dominic, shout out to her, she is so fantastic. I came to her with a lot of different ideas because part of my point of going into movies was to tell my own stories. And one of them was actually Amy. I explored translating that, but she really encouraged me to tell my own story. So Infinity Care is the outgrowth of that dream. And it's really just a retelling of that dream. And it ended up really being kind of a meditation. I call it a meditation on grief and capitalism, because one of the things they don't tell you is when you lose a child, I mean, it costs money, right? Like Hermione, just to pay to get her in the ground was like $5,000. And nobody has life insurance on a 3-year-old. So like that money has to come from somewhere. And all of those things. You know, I had 3 other kids. Like, we did not have the money to, like, that came from the generosity of people that we were able to bury her. And so thinking about all of those things, that's what Infinity Care is. It's an exploration of all of those like complexities of having a child with severe disabilities and then losing that child, and then really the conflict of not of a child who can't interact with you. Like, who are they on the inside? When I used to always think of Hermione as like her on her tower, you know, she's there and there's more going on than she could communicate. Because she couldn't speak doesn't mean she didn't have like the vibrant world of a 3-year-old. We don't know what was going on in her brain. So really that's what Infinity Care is about. It's about like a mother grappling with this loss. It's a short film. So you like jam all this into like 15 minutes. And that's really what inspired me. Agatha absolutely inspired me to make it. I don't think I would have been brave enough to write it if it had not been for her mentorship, which is why I want to mentor other people. And yeah, so it's currently in pre-production, and it did well on the festival circuit as a screenplay. And every time I heard it read, you know, it had readings where it won the grand jury prize at a festival, and it's had readings around, and my students read it a lot. We'll read it in my medical humanities class because, again, me telling my own story helps students to be able to tell theirs. So yeah, I'm about to do the rough cut of the audio. I've got all the audio back from our actors and animators. I'm going to have storyboards next week. It's really exciting. We'll have a few seconds, we'll have 20 seconds of animation. Yeah, my dad, like, it's in production. It's a little wild that thing it's coming to life. So yeah, there you go.
Hey, thank you.
I rambled on for a while.
No, that was good. Like I said, when we do 2020 questions, it gets deep. Now, we're going to move over to Diane Sawyer. Now, Diane Sawyer, if you were interviewing with her, she's going to go right into Medusa's gaze. And we both know why she would do that, because it has a mission behind it. You talked about it a little earlier. You're supporting women and gender diverse creators, focusing on unrepresented voices in film and media who have challenges. What's the product, or not product, I mean, what project are you most excited about with Medusa's Gaze? And how do these things that you're involved with align with your vision as a storyteller? Or at least the one that you're proud of right now, or project?
Well, there are, we have a deep slate at Medusa's Gaze, and it is, there's 4 of us, and really it came out of some of the work that we did in college, where we found that we would be in a class and we read, like, the first semester of our master's degrees, we were all in the same group. We read 14 scripts by white men, and it was like dude, and like two scripts that were like by women and a person of color. And it's like, that's how are we still by the perspective that a white man is not valuable? Like, however, there has to be room for other kinds of stories. And when you look at on the back end of films, not necessarily even the front end, when you're talking, because the front end, we have a lot of things like, I will pick on Wicked. Like, Wicked is a story about female empowerment that's based on a book written by a man, L. Frank Baum, and then another book written by a man. Wicked, the original, was written by Gregory Maguire. Then the Broadway show was developed by Steve Schwartz, another man, and then John Chu brought it to the screen. Like, this is a story of female empowerment that's told predominantly by men. Like,
Right.
how does that work? And
It
so
does,
that's
it
kind of the
doesn't.
impetus for it.
Right. It doesn't work. Man, I'll have to have
Right.
another show about that. We'll have to have you on a deep dive about that on our other show at some point. Okay. Okay, I can go with that now. It's time. Are you
Yeah.
ready for these
So
Barbara? Are you ready for these Barbara Walters questions? You ready?
yes, absolutely.
Okay. So legacy. That's something
Let's roll.
yeah, legacy is something that comes with what you have, what we're about to talk about, and inspiration. Over the span of your career, what do you consider your greatest accomplishment as a storyteller?
Oh gosh. I don't think that I could point to one accomplishment. I think it's that I have helped lots of people. I look at the breadth of stories that I have helped to tell. So I have two books that I finished in the last year, and one that is heading towards progression. One was of a female CEO in the healthcare field, and her story is extraordinary, and helping her to codify that for herself. Another one, I worked on the memoir of a Vietnamese ballet dancer from Boston who's a gay man who his story of intersectional identity is really fantastic and deserves to be told. And then right now I'm working with a client on a book about his journey as a doctor in high conflict zones and creating like he helps handle mass casualty incidents in Afghanistan and Ukraine and Syria and around the world. And he himself is Egyptian. And so that kind of broad range of like helping multiple people across my career tell their stories in ways that feel really good to them and that are really interesting to audiences. So I wouldn't say one thing, it's more like mission aligned. Like I feel really strongly that as my career has progressed, I've been able to stay aligned on this mission of lifting up people whose stories are outside of the norm.
Okay.
That makes sense.
And I can run with that. Now, we come to the end of the show. So there's one thing I like to do for the guests. I like to give you a quick little testament about yourself because we just met on this interview and through whatever sources brought us together. Shout out to Podmatch and Alex and Felipe and those people over there. I don't care. And so here's the deal. Thought provoking. Somewhere along the lines in life, you woke up one day and you became thought provoking. Maybe at the age of 2, 3, 1, whatever. Some age you became thought provoking, and then you took that to another level. You started exuding that out to the world. And as you exuded it out to the world, you developed an idea. And this idea was that there are some people that are unaccounted for. And when people are unaccounted for, they fall through the cracks. That's the next thing that usually lines up with that. And when people fall through the cracks, that's where the story starts. When there's an adversity while someone is diverse, that becomes that social issue that becomes taboo. And you're the type of person to break the norm and go into the taboo. And doing that comes with two blades. It's a double-ended blade. It's a positive and a negative. Positive part, you don't always get to hear the great part about that, but the negative part is what you hear a lot of. And you seem to overcome that pretty well. You look like you got thick skin. Being down there in North Carolina, you got to be tough out there. And that's an inside joke, but you might know what I mean if I, being from North Carolina, I'm from Virginia originally, so we both know. Route 29. And the deal here is this. You are not selfish. You've had a personal tragedy that you've turned into a triumph. Because the greatest thing in life is that when we have a heartbreak, a heartbreak becomes positive. And your heartbreak became positive for you. And a lot of people don't get the opportunity to turn it into a positive. Some people just drown themselves in it and they never get out of that. We never finish mourning because mourning is something that's an everyday process. And I thank you for sharing that with the world, because a lot of people don't have the guts to do that. A lot of people will take coffee, stimulants, and different things to take them away. So thank you for that. And please give yourself a hug, give your son a hug. And you know your daughter's giving you a hug right now. So we both know that's going on there. Then here's the next thing. Media. Media, being a journalist, doing the different parts and the things that you do in media are hard because you have to understand the word no. And when you understand the word no, you don't see it like anybody else. You see it like me and everybody else that works in media. You see it as new opportunity. And that is something that makes you strong, and it builds a character that no one else has. So I want you to take that quick little testimony I gave you right there. I want you to manufacture that into some type of pill and pass it around, or some type of food, and pass it around to people, because people need it. And that's what you're doing now. So please keep doing what you're doing, because people
Thank you
like
so
you
much.
are the warriors, the unspoken warriors, but spoken warriors at the same time, that aid the diverse community that, even as of today, like you were talking about some of the subjects, don't have a voice because of privilege and how and certain atrocities that are set up by our society and other things that are involved there. I won't go into a deep spill of that. If we do that, we'll have to become a conspiracy podcast. So on that note, I'd like to give the floor back to you real quick to leave us on a mission statement. I want you to leave us with your lasting legacy at the end of this episode.
Your story matters. Whoever you are, when you're out there listening to this podcast, your story does matter. And even though you might not see it out there, and you might have a hard time making sense of the dominant culture's way of making sense of stories, yours does matter.
And I thank you on that. And like everybody, I got this outro because, I got this new soundboard. So let's let it do its thing.
Please follow WV Uncommonplace on Instagram, Tumblr, Twitter, TikTok, where we have some great content, Facebook, LinkedIn. Hit up the merch store at oncommonplace.square.site. Join the email list from the website, and rate, subscribe, and give feedback from your favorite podcatcher. And lastly, thanks for listening, and tune into the next episode.
Thank you so much. Let me stop the recording.